Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. A lot in the news about the economy, and are we heading towards recession? Is inflation going up or down? Are the tariffs working? Are they a scare tactic? Or are they a mistake? And the stock market seems to be on a roller coaster. Perfect timing, and I'm always honored when we have time to have Dr. Murray Sabrin with us. He's a Emeritus Professor of Finance at Ramapo College there in New Jersey. He's the author of several books, including his autobiography, which, by the way, is a very interesting read. It's From Immigrant to Public Intellectual, an American story, and it is a beautiful story. So you can check that out. He does have a website, Murray Sabrin, SABRIN.substack.com. Dr. Sabrin, good to see you, friend. How are you, buddy?
Great to be with you, Perry. It's almost spring, so hopefully your neck of the woods will be having some good weather.
Well, we're starting to see buds on trees, so that's a good sign. Well, listen, quite the ride on the roller coaster the last 2 days, and primarily triggered by tariffs. What's the professor's view?
Well, tariffs, as you know, are nothing more than taxes on imported goods, and the importer pays it. So the question is, can importers pass on the higher cost to consumers? And the answer is, it depends. I'm not trying to equivocate, but it depends. If consumers really want the product that's being imported and prices go up because of the tariffs, they'll pay the higher price, but some people won't. So the retailer will suffer lower sales, the importer will have lower sales, and so this will adversely affect American businesses. So when the president says that tariffs are paid by foreign companies, that's just not true, unless, of course, the importer can say to the exporter, you're going to have to eat the tariff that we have to pay, and that may or may not happen. So the bottom line is tariffs are a dislocating phenomenon. In other words, they impact everybody in the supply chain. And the last thing we need is more adverse consequences in the supply chain. We saw what happened during COVID and the aftermath. So we just need the free market to do its thing, which is provide consumers with the best possible goods at the lowest possible prices. And that's why we need more free enterprise and less government management of the economy.
So is there any substance to the claim by the president that the ultimate goal is to equal the tariffs on both sides of the fence, so to speak?
Well, that's his goal. I think it's a mistaken goal. I think what the president should say is, we believe in free enterprise. We believe that companies should make the best possible products for the American people, whether it's manufactured abroad or manufactured in the United States. And he should do something which would be out of the box thinking. He should say, we're going to lower tariffs to zero, but with that, I want the corporate income tax to be eliminated, so corporations will no longer get any subsidies from the federal government, no more grants, and the United States becomes the biggest free trade zone in the world, and we would emulate what Hong Kong and Singapore has done, which were backwater areas in the 1940s and 50s, and now they're terrific economic entities. That would be out-of-the-box thinking, not trying to equalize tariffs, because we tried to do that to some degree in the 1930s, and it was a total disaster for the world economy during the Great Depression. And Trump has this mistaken notion that since tariffs were the primary way that the federal government raised money in the 19th century, and the economy boomed from the end of the Civil War to the early 20th century, and tariffs were the main revenue raiser for the federal government, that should be what we should do now. Well, back then, there was no Social Security, there was no Medicare, there was no Medicaid, there was no $1 trillion of interest expense, there was no military-industrial complex. So if we get rid of all of that, then you could raise enough money for the federal government through tariffs and not have an income tax. But the point is, we have this huge welfare warfare state, and my last article that was posted on the Mises.org website taught financial independence and the constitutional federal budget outlines how we can get to where we need to be, which is having the federal government spend money that's only authorized by Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And Trump should make that case. Unfortunately, he's not doing it because he's not getting good advice on what the constitutional responsibilities are of the federal government.
Excellent point. So In the meantime, before I leave this, we're playing this tit for tat game.
Yeah.
Where do you think it's going to end up?
Well, hopefully, Trump will say to his counterparts around the world, saying, listen, we don't want to have a tariff war because the tariff wars of the 1930s was one of the primary causes of World War II. And we should learn from history that tariffs create international tension. And that's what he needs to say to his counterparts in Canada, Mexico, Europe, Asia, and saying, listen, we're willing to reduce tariffs to zero. You do the same thing, and that will be the level playing field where people around the world will receive the benefits of production that is great for the world economy. And that's what he should be doing. He should be the cheerleader for no tariffs. And if he does that, I think the world economy will enter the golden age that he promises to have.
Some have said that he's using tariffs to end up with what you just said. And I'm trying to figure out the strategy here. Because if you ask, say, for instance, and somewhat hypothetical, if you ask China not to go to zero tariffs, will they?
Well, this is the interesting point. There's nothing wrong with lowering taxes unilaterally, lowering tariffs unilaterally, because that would demonstrate to foreign companies that we are open for business. They can sell their products here, but I think what Trump should do, is couple zero tariffs with getting rid of the regulations that are stifling business in America. Regulations are, in effect, a tax on American businesses. In addition, lowering the corporate tax rate to close to zero is possible. And that's what I've been advocating for decades. If we get the corporate income tax close to zero, or if not zero, then what you'll have is corporations doing what they do best, is not worrying about the tax code. They can get rid of all the tax accountants that they have, which doesn't add anything to the products that they're selling or the services they're providing. And so Trump has an opportunity to do what people like myself and others have been advocating for literally decades: free up the U.S. economy from the stranglehold of Washington, D.C. The great news, Perry, as I've been saying over and over again, is men and women entrepreneurs, despite all the things that are thrown at them by Washington, still are able to produce a great number of goods and services that people want.
What is, I kind of lost track, Professor, what is the corporate rate now?
The corporate rate, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I think it's in the 20s, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And he wants to bring it down to 15, which would be great. Again, he should just keep on reducing the corporate income tax rate, because remember, corporate income is taxed twice. Once at the corporate level, and then if the company pays a dividend, it's taxed again as dividends to shareholders. So double taxation of dividends is wrong. You should only tax income once. And so we should get the corporate income tax down as low as possible. One good thing he's done is expense capital expenditures, which is a great thing. This way you don't have to amortize it over 5, 10, 20 years, whatever the case may be. And but the main point is, we should reduce the dependency on Washington, D.C. The numbers are staggering. Between corporate welfare and individual welfare, about 200 million people are on government payrolls in terms of getting checks: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and food stamps. We have a nation that is dependent upon federal government for their basic subsistence. That's not what the founders' legacy was to us, that we should have a nation where people may be politically independent from Great Britain, which was what the revolution was about 250 years ago, but they should also be financially independent. And that's what I've been writing about. And people need to understand, for everything that the government does, there's a counterpart in the private sector or the nonprofit sector. And that's what I've been advocating for literally half a century.
In your article, would there be some fulfillment of your recommendations if we actually do get to a balanced budget?
Well, the question is, at what level should the budget be balanced? Ronald Reagan campaigned on getting rid of the Department of Education and the Department of Energy. There's no constitutional authority for the government to be involved in education or energy or even commerce or agriculture or health and human services. These are cabinet departments that were created after the New Deal Great Society programs. So both Republicans and Democrats are responsible for these agencies because they either voted for them or kept them in place once they were created. And so if you can't get rid of agencies that have no constitutional authority, then you've lost the argument that you're a fiscal conservative.
Well said. Okay, so the president, the other thing that's happening is what DOGE is uncovering, and I think we're all kind of got our brain on tilt some of the discoveries here. And the wasteful money. If they just stop funding what they're finding, I mean, I don't know if there's any means of collecting what has been wasted, but if they just stop funding what they have found, that savings alone would go a long ways towards the debt, don't you think?
Oh, there's no question about it. The key thing that I'm going to be watching, I think other people like me, is what will the 2026 federal budget look like, which begins this coming October 1st. That would be Trump's first budget as president in his second term. If he presents a budget that reduces spending in all these agencies, then we will be on the way to balancing the budget at a much lower level. Unfortunately, the president says he doesn't want to touch Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Well, that's nearly $4 trillion in spending out of a $7 trillion budget. So most of the spending is there, plus the defense budget is too high, given what you need to protect the American people from any attack. Then you have the wild card, which is not so wild anymore. It's $1 trillion of interest on the national debt. That is such a mind-boggling number that interest on the national debt is the fastest component of the budget. It's growing at faster than anything else because we keep on adding debt every year and it has to be funded at roughly 4% plus per year. So we need to get the budget balanced. We need it balanced at a much lower level. And to pay down the debt is going to be very difficult because you're going to have surpluses every year in order to do that. One way of paying down the debt is, I think what they're starting to do is sell off government assets that could pay down the debt. There's last number I looked at, there's about $5 trillion that's on the government's balance sheet of things that they could sell, buildings, land, equipment, you name it. They can start doing that, do it in a very systematic way, auction it off every week, every month, and use that money to pay down the debt. So you need a plan. And the thing is, so I don't see a plan in the president's proposals that will take us from where we are today of a $7.2 trillion budget to a much lower budget that will be balanced at the end of his term. So he needs to make an address to the American people and say, listen, we have this budget, we have this debt, and both parties are responsible. He should put on his statesman hat and say, this is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. This is a philosophical issue. What do we want the government to do, and how are we going to pay for it? And if he does that from the Oval Office and has the charts and graphs to show that we cannot continue this welfare warfare state, I think people will applaud. Some people won't applaud on the Democratic side, but the point is he should address the American people saying, if financial house in order, there's going to be a lot of pain in the future, as other countries have seen.
There may be a little bit of a crack in that, Professor. We have a federal building here in our backyard that's now on a list of other buildings to the tune of about, I think it's $8.6 trillion in federal buildings that they're going to auction off. One of them happens to be in our backyard, so we saw that. So it looks like the administration is looking into what you just recommended, and that's start getting rid of surplus buildings.
That'd be great, because then you could have developers come in, build housing, because there apparently is a housing shortage around the country. And we could solve a lot of problems by converting a lot of these office spaces into quality rental space or condos or whatever they decide to structure it. But there's no need to have office space that's not used, that's utilized maybe 10%, 20%. And by downsizing the workforce, people can get jobs. There are 7.5 million job openings in the country. So people who are getting fired from the federal government can get a job in the private sector or the nonprofit sector, and they may not be able to earn as much. But the point is, we don't need as many people on the federal payrolls as we have today.
All right, let me take a quick break. Always an honor to have with us Dr. Murray Sabrin. He's Emeritus Professor of Finance. You can check out his website, Murray Sabrin, SABRIN.substack.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Always an honor to have with us Professor Murray Sabrin. He's a Professor Emeritus of Finance there at Ramapo College in New Jersey, author of several books, and his own autobiography I think you'll find to be a very inspiring read. It's called From Immigrant to Public Intellectual, an American Story, and it truly is. He has a website, murraysabrin.substack.com. In your article, Towards Financial Independence and Constitutional Federal Budget, tell us lay people what a constitutional federal budget is.
Here's the wonderful thing about the Constitution. It outlines a roadmap of a constitutional republic where the government is limited in what it can do. That's why we have the Bill of Rights. The rights that people have are inalienable rights. Comes from the Declaration, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then Article 1, Section 8 talks about what is the federal government, what money can they spend for the general welfare? And this is the term that a lot of people on the left use. They think the general welfare means anything that the government spends money on for people's needs is part of the Constitution. Well, that's not true. If you go through Article 1, Section 8, it goes through systematically what is allowed, the spending that is allowed. And then you look at the federal budget, and I have in my article that's posted at the Mises.org website, it shows the disconnect between what government spends and what the Constitution authorizes. And like I said, the president should get on TV, address the nation, have charts, put on his professorial hat, be the explainer-in-chief, be the guardian of the Constitution, and say, listen, we can't do this overnight to get to a constitutional federal budget, but let's begin the process of making the country once again a constitutional republic, because most of these programs were not in place before the Great Depression. The Great Depression changed the whole calculus of what the federal government does, and the Supreme Court allowed it to happen. And so between the Great Society and the New Deal, the Great Society, and other programs, for the last 90 years, we've been seeing the expansion of government spending that is not authorized. And in the old days, Perry, when the Supreme Court ruled that the income tax was unconstitutional in 1895, what did the pro-income tax people do? They got the 16th Amendment passed, and in February 1913, the 16th Amendment was added to the Constitution, which gave the government the right to collect an income tax, a direct income tax on the people. When the prohibitionists wanted to ban alcohol, the manufacture and sale of alcohol, there was no constitutional authority to do so. So they got the Constitution Amendment, and we got the 18th Amendment, which gave the government the authority to ban the manufacture and sale of alcohol. So if we want to do something that's not authorized by Article 1, Section 8, you have to amend the Constitution. So when the country wanted to reduce the voting age from 21 to 18, they just couldn't pass a law. They amended the Constitution. So we have a constitutional method to change, to quote the supreme law of the land, by amending the Constitution from its original format. And that's why we have an amendment process. And since that process has been in place, but again, Article 1, Section 8 has not been fulfilled by the Congress of both parties or the presidents of both parties, and therefore we need to have a national debate. What does it mean to have a constitutional republic? And that is the real constitutional crisis we have in America, not the phony one that the Democrats have been saying of the president doing this, that, and the other thing. The problem is the Congress is spending money that is not authorized. And if I were advising Trump, I would say, make an address to the nation that we need to have a constitutional republic that will give us a golden age. We just can't spend money we don't have at infinity.
So what I kind of got my brain on tilt was to discover that, as an example to what you're saying, is the Department of Education is under the executive branch. So So it would appear that the president has the power to eliminate it, but the money is approved through Congress. So they're approving money to an agency that's under the executive branch that wasn't approved by Congress. Doesn't get any more complicated than that.
Well, this is why we need to have this debate. We need to have a grown-up discussion about what can or should the government do, because you have education, you have your school boards, you have county school boards, you have state school boards, and you have the Department of Education. How many layers of bureaucracy does it take to educate a child in the classroom? And I was in the classroom for 35 years at a college, and there was very little bureaucratic oversight. You had your Department of Finance. We had the business school. You had the college, academic affairs. Then you have the State Department of Education, and that was it. Now, of course, the colleges get federal money, so they have to adhere to the rules of whatever are attached to the money that's given by the federal government. But the point is, we need to take all these programs and bring it down to its entity, which is schools, hospitals. And we can get rid of food stamps. We have food banks all over the country. We need to expand that and get the 42 million people that are on food stamps off of food stamps, and let the local food banks help people in need. We have Habitat for Humanity. They could build housing, affordable housing for people all across the country, like Jimmy Carter did in his years. We have nonprofit health centers that can replace Medicaid. So, excuse me, the people that have enormous wealth. And in Barron's this week, they list the top 10 philanthropists in the country. I think Michael Bloomberg is number one with $3 billion. You have Bill Gates. You have Warren Buffett. You have all these people with incredible resources. They single-handedly can eliminate Medicaid, which would save the taxpayer $800 billion a year by creating thousands and thousands of nonprofit health centers across the country. And this is the model that I think the founders envisioned for this country, people helping people at the local level. And in the old days, it was raising the barn. People would get together in a rural community, help build the barn, and that would be it. No government involvement, no taxpayer money. It's voluntarism at its best.
Do you think, just back to some basic pragmatics, the president campaigned on eliminating Social Security, tax on Social Security, and possibly eliminating the inheritance tax? I mean, they seem to be no-brainers, but they hit walls. What do you think will happen there?
Again, he has to make the case that there's no reason that people who have accumulated wealth during their lifetime, which has been taxed throughout their lifetime, can give it to their children or heirs or whoever that may be on a tax-free basis. And that would prevent family farms from having to be sold in order to pay the estate tax on a family farm or stocks or anything like that. Warren Buffett has figured it out. His estate is not paying any taxes because he's donating part of his portfolio to the Gates Foundation and other foundations, so his estate will never be taxed. So again, there are loopholes for very wealthy people, people of modest means, and now the state exemption is, I think, $13 million, which means that the average person will be exempt from the estate tax. But the estate tax is another example of how the government intrudes in private financial transactions, which should have no place in a free society.
Isn't it interesting, Professor, that everything we're talking about today wasn't on the table a year ago? Mm-hmm. And today it's on the table, and it's very controversial. Just in an administration change of having a CEO-type president looking at every nook and cranny. Obviously, there's other opinions on how he should do it, but the fact that we are now uncovering fraud and mismanagement at a level, isn't that overall healthy?
You bring up one of the most important points. This is why government should be downsized to its essential elements, because people in Congress, it's not their money. They don't care about oversight. They don't care about efficiency because it's not their money. All they're trying to do is get as many votes as possible to get reelected. And the way you get reelected in America is you dole out money from the taxpayer. That's why we have a $7.2 trillion federal budget. People are feeding at the trough, and the people in Congress are what? They're the ones that are filling the trough with taxpayer dollars. This is the contradiction in America. We're supposed to have a free society. A free society means you have control over your own money. You have control as much as possible over your destiny. And the government should just leave you alone to do what you do best, which is develop your skills and pursue your happiness by making sure that your life and liberties are protected by the government, not the sustenance that you need. That's something I learned as a youngster growing up in New York City when I saw my father going to work. And the best anti-poverty program in the world, Perry, is the two-parent family. That's what all the statistics show.
That's absolutely beautiful. Where can people get a copy of your article?
The article is available. Here it is right here. Toward financial independence and a constitutional federal budget. It was published a week ago on the Mises website. So if you just Google it, toward financial independence and a constitutional federal budget, you'll able to read the 1,700 words. This is a condensed version of an 11,000-word essay I just sent to the editor of a book that's coming out later this year, early next year, entitled The Ethics and Philosophy of Taxation, edited by a longtime friend and accounting professor, Robert McGee. And this essay was really something that I really wanted to get out, because it's really something I wrote 30 years ago when I wrote Tax-Free 2000, of how we could have a roadmap to a tax-free America. And we're starting to get that idea, because in Florida, Governor DeSantis wants to get rid of the property tax, which I advocated back in my 1995 book. And I also want to get rid of all the other taxes as well. So again, we need a roadmap. We need to have a debate. We need to have a civil discussion about what is America all about. It's not about dependency. It's about freedom and liberty and free enterprise and peaceful relations with other countries around the world.
Well said. All right. MurraySabrin.substack.com is his website. You can probably Google Towards Financial Independence and Constitutional Federal Budget and get a copy of the article. Thank you, Professor. Always an honor to have you, sir. Look forward to more visits.
Thanks, Perry. It's great to always be with you.